Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the impossible sight through the main viewport. Massive crystalline ships hung in space like frozen lightning, each one larger than Earth's biggest cities. They had appeared without warning 3 days ago, materializing in perfect formation above every major human world simultaneously. The Stellar Dominion had finally made contact with humanity, and their message was simple: submit or die. Sarah had spent her entire career preparing for first contact scenarios, but nothing had prepared her for this. The alien empire stretched across half the galaxy, encompassing thousands of star systems and hundreds of different species. They called themselves the rightful rulers of all intelligent life, and they had come to collect their newest subjects. The communication had been broadcast on every frequency, translated into every human language with terrifying efficiency. The voice that spoke was cold, mechanical, yet somehow conveying absolute authority. Primitive species of the third planet. You have developed faster than light travel without permission. You have established colonies beyond your birth world without authorization. You have committed acts of expansion that violate the natural order established by the Stellar Dominion 40,000 years before your species learned to make fire. Sarah remembered the chill that had run down her spine as the message continued. By decree of Emperor Zarthek the Eternal, your species is hereby classified as Subject Race 4847. You will cease all military activities immediately. Your fleets will stand down. Your governments will prepare for integration into the Dominion structure. Resistance will result in the complete sterilization of your species and the reassignment of your worlds to more deserving civilizations. The alien fleet had given humanity 72 hours to comply. That deadline was now 6 hours away, and the emergency session of the United Earth Council had just concluded. The vote had been unanimous, though Sarah knew it hadn't been easy for anyone. Humanity's answer was no. Admiral Chun to all fleet commanders. Sarah spoke into her communicator, her voice carrying across the quantum networks that connected Earth's hastily assembled defense forces. Operation Prometheus is a go. All ships prepare for combat operations. The response came immediately from Captain Marcus Torres aboard the UES Valiant. Ma'am, are we really about to pick a fight with an empire that's conquered half the galaxy? Sarah looked out at the alien ships, their crystal surfaces pulsing with energy the human scientists couldn't begin to understand. Captain, 3 days ago I would have said this was suicide. But I've been reading the intelligence reports and something doesn't add up. She pulled up the tactical display, showing the positioning of the Dominion fleet. 47 ships hung in high orbit around Earth, each one broadcasting enough power to level continents. Similar fleets surrounded Mars, the Europa colonies, and every other human settlement. These ships are massive, clearly advanced, but look at their formation. They're spread thin across all our worlds. If they really had overwhelming force, why not concentrate it? Why give us a deadline at all? Why not just attack? Commander Elena Vasquez from the UES Thunderbolt chimed in on the communications channel. You think they're bluffing, Admiral? Not bluffing, Sarah replied, studying the energy readings from the alien vessels. But I think they're not as unbeatable as they want us to believe. Look at these power signatures. They're running hot, really hot. Those ships are pushing their systems hard just to maintain position. The truth was that Sarah had spent the last 3 days coordinating with Dr. James Morrison, Earth's leading expert on exotic physics. His analysis of the alien technology had revealed something interesting. The Dominion ships were indeed powerful, but they were also old. Very old. All ships. Listen carefully, Sarah continued. Intelligence indicates these vessels are using technology that's millennia old. They're built for intimidation and long-range bombardment, but they've got weaknesses. Their shields are designed to deflect energy weapons, but they're vulnerable to kinetic impacts. Their massive size makes them slow to maneuver. Captain Torres sounded skeptical. With respect, Admiral, we're talking about ships that could probably crack planets. Even if they're old, they're still way beyond anything we've got. Sarah nodded grimly. He was right, of course. Humanity's fleet consisted of 300 ships, most of them converted civilian vessels hastily fitted with military hardware. Against an empire that ruled thousands of worlds, it should have been hopeless. But humans had always been good at fighting hopeless battles. All ships implement Morrison Protocol, Sarah ordered. Target their power distribution nodes. Dr. Morrison's analysis indicates that if we can overwhelm their energy grid in the right sequence, we might be able to cascade their entire system. The Morrison Protocol was humanity's desperate gambit, based on 3 days of frantic analysis of captured Dominion signals. Dr. Morrison had identified what he believed were critical vulnerabilities in their power systems. It was untested, dangerous, and probably suicidal. It was also the only chance they had. "Admiral," came a new voice on the channel. This was General Patricia Hayes, commander of Earth's orbital defense platforms. "I'm reading massive energy buildup from the alien ships. I think they're preparing to attack." Sarah checked her chronometer. The deadline was still 4 hours away, but apparently the Dominion wasn't interested in waiting. "All ships, battle stations. This is it." The space around Earth erupted into chaos as the first shots were fired. The Dominion ships opened up with energy beams that could have powered entire cities, lashing out at the approaching human fleet. The U.S. Courage, a converted cargo hauler, took a direct hit and simply ceased to exist, vaporized in an instant. But the humans kept coming. Sarah watched as Captain Maria Santos piloted the U.S. Revenge in a suicidal dive toward one of the massive crystal ships. The Revenge was a mining vessel that had been fitted with kinetic drivers, essentially massive railguns designed for asteroid processing. Santos fired everything she had at the Dominion ship's power nodes, then activated her ship's emergency thrusters for a ramming attack. The impact sent shockwaves through the crystal ship's structure. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, the alien vessel's shields flickered and died, its hull plates beginning to crack along stress lines. "It's working. Dr. Morrison's voice crackled over the communication system from his position aboard the command ship. The kinetic impact disrupted their power grid exactly as predicted. "If we can coordinate multiple strikes on the same target." His transmission cut off as another human ship was destroyed by alien fire. The U.S. Liberty, a former passenger liner, broke apart under the concentrated beams of 3 Dominion vessels. But across the battlefield, something unprecedented was happening. For the first time in 40,000 years, someone was fighting back against the Stellar Dominion. And, more importantly, they were actually hurting them. Captain Torres brought the U.S. Valiant in low, using Earth's gravity well to accelerate his approach. His ship was armed with prototype plasma cannons that had never been tested in combat, but he lined up on the same crystal ship that Santos had damaged and fired everything he had. The combined damage was too much for the alien vessel's ancient systems. The crystalline hull began to fracture, energy bleeding out in brilliant cascades of light. Then, with a flash that briefly outshone the sun, the Dominion ship exploded. A cheer went up across the human fleet's communication channels, but Sarah knew they had only bought themselves time. 1 alien ship destroyed, 46 to go, and humanity had already lost a dozen vessels. "All ships, concentrate fire on damaged targets," she ordered. "We can't waste this opportunity." But even as her fleet pressed their attack, Sarah knew this was just the beginning. Earth's defense fleet represented barely a fraction of humanity's total military strength. The real test would come when the Dominion sent reinforcements, when their main battle fleets arrived to crush this unexpected resistance. The larger question remained: what happened when an empire that had ruled unopposed for millennia suddenly faced an enemy that refused to kneel? As another Dominion ship began to show damage under concentrated human fire, Sarah allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. Whatever happened next, humanity had just announced to the galaxy that they were not going quietly into subjugation. The war for human independence had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. Commander Thalex stood in the command center of the Dominion staging area, watching the tactical displays with growing disbelief. The primitive species from the third planet was actually fighting back. More than that, they were inflicting damage. In 40,000 years of conquest, no species had ever dared to resist after witnessing the power of the Dominion fleet. Most surrendered immediately upon seeing the crystal ships materialize in their skies. Those few who had initially resisted had been quickly crushed by overwhelming force. But these humans were different. They had analyzed Dominion technology in mere days and identified weaknesses that the Empire's greatest scientists insisted didn't exist. They fought with a combination of desperation and tactical brilliance that was unlike anything in the Dominion's vast military archives. "Sir," reported his aide, a nervous Velthari whose blue skin had turned pale with fear, "the humans have destroyed 3 of our vessels and damaged 7 others. Fleet Commander Zektul is requesting permission to begin planetary bombardment." Thalek considered the request. Standard Dominion protocol for dealing with resistance was simple. Make an example that would deter other species from similar acts of defiance. Crack a few planets, sterilize a few billion lives, and word would spread throughout the galaxy that the Dominion's patience was not infinite. But something about this situation felt different. The humans weren't fighting like a primitive species facing inevitable extinction. They were fighting like they believed they could win. "Negative," Thalek finally replied. "No planetary bombardment until I understand what we're dealing with. Order the fleet to maintain orbital positions and continue defensive operations only." The truth was that Thalek had spent centuries studying the species that the Dominion had conquered, and he had never encountered anything like humanity's response. Most races were either too terrified to fight or too primitive to pose a real threat. But the humans had somehow bridged that gap, combining desperate courage with sophisticated tactical analysis. More disturbing were the reports coming in from other human worlds. Mars had erupted in similar resistance, with human ships emerging from hidden asteroid bases to attack the Dominion fleet there. The Europa colonies had somehow managed to damage 2 crystal ships using modified industrial equipment. Even the tiny research station on Titan had apparently tried to ram one of the Dominion vessels with a converted ice hauler. It was unprecedented. An entire species had simultaneously decided to fight rather than surrender, and they were doing it with a coordination that suggested careful planning. "Sir," the aide continued nervously, "we're also receiving reports from the outer monitoring stations. Human ships are massing in the Centauri system. Large numbers of them, including vessels of unknown configuration." Thalek's eyes widened slightly. Unknown configuration meant that humanity had been building ships that the Dominion's intelligence network hadn't detected. In 3 days, they had gone from a recently spacefaring species to an organized military threat. "How many ships?" he asked. "Current estimates suggest over 2,000 vessels, sir, and more arriving every hour. 2,000 ships. In the entire history of Dominion conquest, no single species had ever fielded more than a few hundred vessels, and those have been vast, slow dreadnoughts designed for intimidation rather than combat. But if the intelligence reports were accurate, humanity had been quietly building a massive fleet designed specifically for war." Thalek pulled up the strategic display, showing the disposition of Dominion forces throughout human space. Suddenly, their formation didn't look like overwhelming superiority. It looked like they were outnumbered. "Contact Emperor Zarthek immediately," he ordered. "Tell him we need reinforcements. Lots of them." As his aide hurried to comply, Thalek continued studying the tactical situation. For the first time in his long career, he found himself wondering if the Dominion had bitten off more than they could chew. Back aboard the UES Defiance, Admiral Chun was coordinating the most desperate battle in human history when her communication officer called out with urgent news. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Centauri fleet. Admiral Jackson reports that Operation Lighthouse is proceeding on schedule." Sarah allowed herself a tight smile. Operation Lighthouse was humanity's real ace in the hole. While the Dominion had been focused on the immediate human worlds, a massive fleet had been assembling in the Alpha Centauri system. Admiral Robert Jackson commanded over 2,000 ships, everything from massive battlecruisers that had been under construction in secret asteroid shipyards to converted cargo vessels armed with experimental weapons. More importantly, the Centauri fleet included the UES Prometheus, humanity's first attempt at building a ship using principles reverse-engineered from captured alien technology. "Signal Admiral Jackson," Sarah ordered. "Tell him the Earth fleet will continue to engage the enemy here. He is authorized to begin Phase 2 operations." Phase 2 was the part of humanity's plan that even Sarah found hard to believe. Instead of simply trying to drive off the Dominion fleet, they were going to attempt something that no species had ever tried. They were going to capture Dominion ships intact and turn their own technology against them. The plan was insane, desperate, and probably impossible. But as Sarah watched another human ship sacrifice itself to damage an alien vessel, she reflected that impossible had become humanity's specialty. Admiral Robert Jackson stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus, watching as his massive fleet emerged from hyperspace around one of the Dominion's staging areas. The alien facility was a construct of impossible beauty and terrifying power, a crystalline structure the size of a small moon that served as a forward base for their conquest operations. "All ships, this is Admiral Jackson," he broadcast across the quantum communication network. "Today we prove to the galaxy that humanity will not go quietly into the night. Operation Lighthouse begins now." The human fleet opened fire as one, thousands of ships unleashing everything they had at the Dominion facility: kinetic rounds, plasma bolts, nuclear missiles, and exotic weapons that human scientists had developed in the 3 days since first contact painted space with brilliant destruction. The facility's shields absorbed the initial barrage, energy cascading across crystalline barriers in beautiful, deadly patterns. But the human attack continued, wave after wave of concentrated fire that gradually began to overwhelm the ancient defensive systems. And then something unprecedented happened. Instead of fighting to the death, as every other species had done, the Dominion facility began transmitting surrender signals. Jackson stared at the tactical display in amazement. "Communication. Are you sure about this translation?" "Yes, sir," his communication officer replied. "They're requesting terms for surrender. They're offering to negotiate." For the first time in 40,000 years, the Stellar Dominion was asking for mercy from one of their intended subjects. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity played by different rules. The conference room aboard the UES Prometheus felt impossibly small for a meeting that would determine the fate of two civilizations. Admiral Jackson sat across from Commander Thalek, the highest-ranking Dominion officer willing to negotiate. Between them lay the terms that had seemed impossible just days before: the conditional surrender of the Stellar Dominion's forces in human space. Thalek's crystalline exoskeleton caught the light as he shifted uncomfortably. His species, the Keth Mori, had been among the Dominion's founding races, and in his 3 centuries of life, he had never imagined sitting across from a primitive species as an equal. "You must understand," Thalek said, his translated voice carrying undertones of confusion and something that might have been respect. "This is unprecedented. The Dominion does not negotiate with subject races." Admiral Jackson leaned forward, his weathered face showing the strain of the last week's continuous combat operations. "Then, maybe it's time the Dominion learned some new tricks. Because we're not subjects, and we're definitely not backing down." The negotiations have been ongoing for 6 hours, ever since the human fleet had successfully captured the Dominion staging facility. The facility itself was a treasure trove of alien technology, but more importantly, it contained detailed records of the Dominion's military structure and strategic plans. What those records revealed had changed everything. Dr. Elizabeth Kane, humanity's lead xenobiologist, consulted her tablet before addressing the alien commander. "According to the data we recovered from your facility, the Stellar Dominion currently controls 4,847 different species across 12,000 star systems. Is that accurate?" Thalek's mandibles clicked in what humans had learned was a sign of affirmation. The number grows regularly as we encounter new civilizations ready for integration into the natural order. Integration, scoffed Colonel Maria Santos, who had survived the destruction of her ship during the Battle of Earth and been reassigned to the negotiation team. You mean conquest and slavery? The Dominion provides order, protection, and purpose to species that would otherwise destroy themselves, Thalek replied, his voice taking on the tone of someone reciting ancient doctrine. Left to their own devices, primitive races inevitably fall to war, environmental collapse, or technological catastrophe. The Dominion saves them from themselves. Jackson held up a hand to prevent Santos from responding. Commander Thalek, let me ask you something. In the 40,000 years since the Dominion was established, how many of your subject species have been granted full membership? How many have been elevated to equal status with the founding races? The alien commander's silence was telling. Finally, he spoke quietly, the process of integration is complex. Most species require extensive guidance before they can be trusted with full citizenship. 40,000 years, Dr. Kane said softly, and you've never found a single species worthy of equality. Doesn't that tell you something about your system? What the human analysis of Dominion records had revealed was an empire built on a foundation of convenient lies. The natural order that justified their conquests wasn't natural at all. It was a carefully constructed hierarchy designed to keep the original founding races in power while using conquered species as a labor force and military cannon fodder. More importantly, the records showed that the Dominion was not as stable as it appeared. Resistance movements existed on dozens of worlds, brutally suppressed, but never completely eliminated. Several species had attempted coordinated uprisings over the centuries, though none had succeeded in breaking free. Until now. What my government wants to know, Jackson continued, is whether you're interested in genuine peace, or if you're just buying time to bring in reinforcements. Thalek's exoskeleton shifted colors slightly, which Dr. Kane had identified as a stress response. Admiral Jackson, you must understand the position this puts me in. I am a mid-level fleet commander. I do not have the authority to negotiate fundamental changes to Dominion policy. Then, get someone who does, Colonel Santos interjected, because humanity isn't going to accept anything less than recognition of our independence and sovereignty. The truth was that the human negotiating position was stronger than anyone had expected. The destruction of the staging facility and the capture of 3 intact Dominion vessels had provided Earth scientists with a wealth of information about alien technology. More importantly, it had demonstrated to the galaxy that the Dominion could be beaten. Reports were already coming in from human intelligence networks throughout known space. Several species that had been conquered by the Dominion were showing signs of increased resistance activity. The Velthari had launched a coordinated uprising on their homeworld. The mining slaves of the asteroid principalities had seized control of their orbital facilities. The galaxy was watching, and what they saw was the most powerful empire in known space being forced to negotiate with a species that had been spacefaring for less than a century. There is another matter we must discuss, Thalek said reluctantly. Emperor Zarthek has dispatched the 4th Battle Fleet to human space. They will arrive within 10 standard days. Jackson felt his blood run cold. The 4th Battle Fleet was legendary even among Dominion forces. 2,000 of the Empire's most advanced warships, commanded by Fleet Admiral Kreshtar, the Dominion's most successful military leader. How many ships? He asked quietly. 2,000 vessels of the line, plus support craft. Admiral Kreshtar has been given authorization to use any means necessary to restore Dominion authority in this sector. Dr. Kane looked up from her tablet with concern. What exactly does any means necessary include? Thalek's response chilled everyone in the room. Fleet Admiral Kreshtar has been granted permission to initiate Protocols 7 through 9. Jackson had studied the captured Dominion military codes. Protocol 7 was the systematic destruction of all infrastructure on Resistance worlds. Protocol 8 was the forced relocation of entire populations to labor camps. Protocol 9 was complete planetary sterilization. So we have 10 days to prepare for a fight against 2,000 of your best ships, Jackson said grimly. Any advice on how to survive that? For a long moment, Thalek said nothing. Then, quietly, he spoke words that would change the course of the war. There might be another way. 3 days later, Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the command center of the captured Dominion facility, now designated Forward Operating Base Liberty. The massive crystalline structure had been converted into humanity's primary military headquarters in record time, its alien technology gradually coming under human control. The plan that had emerged from Thalek's suggestion was audacious even by human standards. Instead of trying to fight the Fourth Battle Fleet directly, they were going to attempt something that no species had ever tried. They were going to turn the Dominion's own subjects against them. Status report, Sarah requested as she entered the communications center. Commander Lisa Park, formerly of the UES Thunderbolt, looked up from her station. We've established contact with resistance movements on 47 different worlds, Admiral. The response has been overwhelming. The plan, designated Operation Liberation, involved using the captured Dominion communication networks to coordinate simultaneous uprisings throughout the Empire. The timing had to be perfect. If they could spark galaxy-wide rebellion just as the Fourth Battle Fleet arrived in human space, Admiral Kreshtar would face an impossible choice. Continue the attack on humanity while his empire burned, or withdraw forces to suppress the uprisings. What about our alien allies? Sarah asked. Dr. Kane approached with a datapad. Commander Thalek has been incredibly helpful. He's provided us with detailed information about Dominion military protocols and has agreed to act as our liaison with potential defectors within their fleet. It turned out that Thalek's willingness to negotiate wasn't unique. Many mid-level Dominion officers had grown uncomfortable with the Empire's methods over the centuries. The human rebellion had given them something they had never dared to hope for, an example of successful resistance. We've also received a message from the Velthari High Council, Commander Park continued. They're formally requesting military assistance for their independence movement. Sarah nodded grimly. The Velthari uprising had been one of the most successful so far, but they were facing brutal retaliation from Dominion security forces. Helping them would mean committing human ships to combat operations far from Earth, but it would also demonstrate humanity's commitment to galactic liberation. Approved, she decided. Send the Fifth Fleet to Velthari space. Orders are to provide direct military support for their independence forces. The strategic situation was complex and dangerous. Humanity now found itself fighting not just for its own freedom, but as the catalyst for a galaxy-wide revolution against Dominion rule. It was a role that no one had planned for, but one that circumstances had forced upon them. Admiral, called out Lieutenant Commander Chun Wei from the intelligence station. We're receiving updates from our deep space monitoring networks. The Fourth Battle Fleet has accelerated their approach. New estimated arrival time is 6 days. Sarah felt the familiar knot in her stomach that came with impossible odds. 6 days to coordinate the liberation of half a galaxy while preparing for the largest space battle in human history. Send a message to Admiral Jackson, she ordered. Tell him to implement Phase 3 immediately. Phase 3 was humanity's final gambit. If Operation Liberation succeeded in sparking widespread rebellion, and if they could hold off the Fourth Battle Fleet long enough, they might just change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. But if they failed, humanity wouldn't live to see the results of their revolution. Fleet Admiral Kreshtar stood in the command center of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the tactical displays with growing anger. His fleet of 2,000 vessels represented the finest military force the Empire had ever assembled, capable of reducing entire star systems to cosmic dust. But as they approached human space, reports continued to pour in from across the galaxy. Uprising on Velthari Prime, rebellion in the asteroid principalities, coordinated resistance on dozens of worlds that had been pacified for centuries. All of it triggered by one primitive species that refused to submit. Status report, he demanded from his chief of staff. Admiral Vendak, a veteran of countless campaigns, looked troubled as he consulted his displays. Sir, we're now tracking active resistance movements on 137 worlds. Several sector fleets have been forced to withdraw from their assigned positions to suppress uprisings. Kreshtar's massive form tensed with fury. In his 4 centuries of military service, he had never seen anything like the current situation. The Dominion had been built on the principle that organized resistance was impossible. Individual species might rebel, but coordinated action across multiple star systems was unthinkable. Until the humans had made it happen. What about the human military strength? He asked. Current intelligence estimates place their total fleet at approximately 4,000 vessels, Vindak replied. However, many of these are converted civilian craft with limited military capability. For 1,000 ships, under normal circumstances, Kreshtar's fleet would have crushed such opposition without difficulty. But these are not normal circumstances. The humans had demonstrated tactical innovations that violated everything the Dominion knew about warfare. They used their ships as expendable weapons, ramming Dominion vessels in coordinated attacks that overwhelmed defensive systems. They had somehow reverse-engineered Dominion technology in a matter of days. Most disturbing of all, they had turned the Empire's own communication networks against them, coordinating resistance on a galactic scale. Sir, his communications officer called out urgently. We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're requesting a parley under standard combat protocols. Kreshtar considered the request. Standard protocols required that he at least listen to surrender terms, though he had no intention of accepting anything less than complete submission. Put them through, he ordered. The main display activated, showing the image of a human female in military uniform. The name at the bottom of the screen identified her as Admiral Sarah Chun, apparently the overall commander of human forces. Fleet Admiral Kreshtar, she said without preamble. I'm Admiral Chun of the United Earth Defense Force. I think we need to talk. Kreshtar's voice carried the authority of millennia of conquest. Primitive creature, you have precisely one opportunity to surrender unconditionally. Submit now, and your species will be granted the mercy of slavery rather than extinction. To his surprise, the human admiral smiled. Actually, I was calling to offer you the chance to surrender. Your empire is falling apart around you, Admiral. Half your subject species are in open revolt. Your own officers are defecting to join us. And in about 6 hours, you're going to discover just how much humans have learned about your technology. The transmission ended, leaving Kreshtar staring at a blank screen. For the first time in his long career, the fleet admiral of the Dominion's most elite force found himself wondering if he was about to lose. The answer would come soon enough. In 6 hours, the largest space battle in galactic history would begin, and the fate of 2 civilizations would hang in the balance. But across the galaxy, on worlds that had been enslaved for millennia, millions of beings watched the approaching conflict with hope they had never dared to feel. For the first time in 40,000 years, the Stellar Dominion faced an enemy that refused to kneel. The Age of Empire was ending, and the Age of Freedom was about to begin. The space around Earth had become a graveyard of shattered ships and broken dreams. Admiral Sarah Chun watched from the bridge of the UES Defiance as the final wave of Fleet Admiral Kreshtar's assault crashed against humanity's desperate defenses. The 4th Battle Fleet had lived up to its fearsome reputation, but after 18 hours of continuous combat, both sides were bleeding. Damage report, Sarah called out, her voice hoarse from hours of commanding the most brutal space battle in human history. Commander Park looked up from her station, her face pale with exhaustion. We've lost 60% of our ships, Admiral. The Martian defense grid is down to 30% strength. The orbital platforms around Earth are holding, but barely. Sarah nodded grimly. The human fleet had fought beyond all expectations, but the mathematics of the situation were inexorable. Kreshtar's 2,000 ships have been reduced to roughly 800, but humanity's forces were down to less than 1,500 effective vessels. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a crushing defeat for the human cause. But these weren't normal circumstances. Signal from Admiral Jackson. Park continued. Operation Liberation has exceeded all projections. We're now tracking active uprisings on over 300 worlds. That was the key to everything. While the 4th Battle Fleet had been locked in combat with Earth's defenders, the galaxy had erupted in coordinated rebellion. Dominion security forces were stretched beyond their breaking point, and several entire sector fleets had mutinied rather than fire on civilian populations. "What about our special guests?" Sarah asked. Dr. Kane's smile for the first time in days. "Commander Thalek reports that defections from the Dominion fleet are accelerating. We now have over 200 alien ships fighting alongside us, and more switching sides every hour." The sight of Dominion vessels turning their weapons against their former allies had been one of the war's most shocking developments. Thalek's initial defection had encouraged others, and the human promise of equality rather than subjugation had proven irresistible to species that had suffered under the Empire's rule for millennia. "Admiral," called out Lieutenant Chun Wei from the sensor station, "I'm reading massive energy buildup from the Eternal Dominion. Kreshtar's flagship is preparing to fire something big." Sarah studied the tactical display with growing alarm. The Eternal Dominion was powering up its primary weapons array, channeling enough energy to crack a small moon. But the target wasn't Earth's orbital defenses or the human fleet. It was aimed directly at Earth itself. "All ships, emergency maneuvers," Sarah ordered immediately. "Kreshtar's going for planetary bombardment. We have to stop that shot." The response was immediate and desperate. Every human ship in range converged on the Dominion flagship, throwing themselves into the path of destruction with the reckless courage that had become humanity's signature. The UES Valiant, badly damaged but still fighting under Captain Torres, led the charge directly at the massive alien vessel. But they weren't alone. 3 Velthari cruisers that had defected from the Dominion fleet joined the attack, their sleek ships dancing through the defensive fire like silver arrows. A squadron of converted mining vessels from the asteroid principalities followed close behind, their improvised weapons blazing. "This is Captain Torres," came the transmission from the Valiant. "We're going in. If we don't make it back, tell my family they died free." Sarah watched in horror and pride as the desperate assault force closed on the Eternal Dominion. Kreshtar's defensive systems were formidable, and ships began disappearing in bursts of brilliant energy. The UES Courage, a converted passenger liner, simply vanished in a flash of vaporized metal. 2 of the Velthari cruisers were caught by the flagship's secondary weapons and torn apart. But the attack pressed on, and finally, Captain Torres achieved what every human ship was striving for: a direct hit on the Eternal Dominion's primary weapon array. The explosion was visible across half the solar system as the flagship's main gun destroyed itself in a cascade of uncontrolled energy. The mighty vessel, symbol of Dominion power for centuries, began breaking apart under the stress of its own weapons failure. "Kreshtar's ship is going down," Commander Park reported with amazement. "The Eternal Dominion is breaking up." But the victory came at a terrible cost. Captain Torres and the crew of the UES Valiant had been caught in the explosion, their ship consumed in the same fireball that destroyed the alien flagship. Dozens of other vessels, human and alien alike, had sacrificed themselves to save Earth from planetary bombardment. As the debris cloud expanded and secondary explosions lit up space like deadly fireworks, a strange quiet fell over the battlefield. The remaining Dominion ships seemed frozen, unsure how to proceed now that their legendary commander was gone. Then, something unprecedented happened. "Admiral," Park called out in amazement, "we're receiving surrender signals from the entire Dominion fleet. All remaining ships are standing down." Sarah stared at the tactical display in disbelief. In 40,000 years of conquest, no Dominion fleet had ever surrendered. They fought to the death or they died trying. But the combination of massive losses, the death of their commander, and the sight of their own ships defecting had apparently broken something fundamental in their military doctrine. "Open a channel to all ships," Sarah ordered. "This is Admiral Chun to all vessels in the Sol system." The immediate threat to Earth has ended. All ships are to stand down and prepare to receive surrender protocols. As the human fleet began the complex process of accepting the surrender of the most powerful military force in the galaxy, reports continued to pour in from across known space. The galactic uprising had reached critical mass. The Dominion's central government on the homeworld of Kethmor was under siege by a coalition of liberated species. Emperor Zarthek himself had been forced to flee his palace as former subjects stormed the capital. But the most significant development was happening on Earth itself, in the conference rooms where human diplomats were working with representatives from dozens of liberated worlds to establish something that had never existed before, a galactic government based on equality and voluntary cooperation rather than conquest and subjugation. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the same place where she had watched the first Dominion ships appear in Earth's sky. But now the view was very different. Ships from across the galaxy filled the space around Earth, not as conquerors but as delegates to the newly formed Galactic Federation. The transformation had been remarkable and rapid. The collapse of the Stellar Dominion had left a power vacuum that the liberated species had been quick to fill. Rather than fragmenting into chaos, they had come together to build something new, with humanity serving as the catalyst and moral center of the new order. "Admiral Chun," came a familiar voice behind her. She turned to see Commander Thalek approaching, but he looked very different now. Instead of the harsh military bearing of a Dominion officer, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had found a cause worth believing in. "Commander," she replied warmly. "Or should I say Ambassador Thalek?" The former Dominion officer had been elected by his people to serve as their representative to the new Galactic Federation. His species, the Kethmori, had been one of the Dominion's founding races, but they had enthusiastically embraced the new order once they understood what freedom could offer. "The council meetings have concluded," Thalek reported. "The Federation Charter has been ratified by all member worlds. We're officially no longer subjects of anyone." Sarah smiled at the note of wonder that still crept into his voice when he talked about freedom. "And the holdout worlds? Still negotiating, but the economic incentives are proving persuasive. Free trade is considerably more profitable than tribute extraction. Even the most conservative worlds are beginning to see the advantages of voluntary cooperation." It hadn't been a perfect transformation. Some former Dominion worlds had initially descended into chaos, and there were still pockets of resistance from die-hard Imperial loyalists. But the overall trend was clear. Across the galaxy, species that had been enslaved for millennia were choosing freedom over security, cooperation over domination. "There's something else," Thalek continued. "The exploration fleets have made contact with civilizations beyond the former Dominion's borders. Apparently, word of the liberation has spread. Several species that were never conquered are expressing interest in joining the Federation." Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with responsibility. Humanity had started this war simply trying to defend their own freedom. They had ended up liberating half the galaxy and establishing a new form of galactic civilization. It was a responsibility that no species had ever faced before. "Any word from the exploration missions to the Galactic Rim?" she asked. "Admiral Jackson's fleet has made contact with 3 previously unknown civilizations. All of them are interested in peaceful relations and potential Federation membership. It seems that our reputation has preceded us." The exploration missions were one of the Federation's most ambitious projects. Instead of the Dominion's pattern of conquest and subjugation, the new galactic government was actively seeking out unknown species to offer them equality and cooperation. It was a radical departure from 40,000 years of imperial expansion. "And Emperor Zarthek?" Thalek's expression darkened slightly. "Still at large, but his support continues to erode. Most of his remaining loyalists have either surrendered or fled to the unexplored regions beyond Federation space. Intelligence suggests he's trying to rebuild his power base in the galactic core, but without the industrial capacity of the conquered worlds, his options are limited." The former emperor had become something of a galactic fugitive, desperately trying to rebuild his shattered empire while being pursued by Federation forces and his own former subjects. It was a fitting end for someone who had ruled through fear and oppression for so long. Sarah turned back to the viewport, watching as a massive construction project took shape in Earth's orbit. The new Federation headquarters was being built using technology shared freely between member species, combining human engineering with alien innovations in a collaborative effort that would have been impossible under the old Imperial system. You know, she said thoughtfully, 6 months ago, I was just trying to keep Earth safe from alien invasion. Now we're building a galactic civilization based on principles that most species had never even imagined. Thalek nodded slowly. Your species has a gift for the impossible, Admiral. You took concepts like freedom and equality that were considered naive idealism and made them the foundation of galactic government. It's remarkable. We had help, Sarah replied. None of this would have been possible without allies like you who were willing to risk everything for the chance at something better. The truth was that humanity's victory had depended as much on the courage of alien defectors as on their own military prowess. Species that had been conditioned for millennia to accept imperial rule had chosen to fight for freedom when given the opportunity. It had been the greatest validation of human ideals that anyone could have asked for. Admiral, Thalek said quietly, there's something I've been meaning to ask. The human concept of democracy, of government by the consent of the governed, was this always part of your species' culture? Sarah laughed softly. Hardly. We've spent most of our history fighting wars over who gets to rule whom. Democracy is something we had to learn, often through bitter experience. But we discovered that people fight harder for their own freedom than they do for someone else's empire. And that's why you won, Thalek observed. The Dominion could never understand that principle. They believed that power came from the ability to compel obedience. You proved that true power comes from inspiring people to fight for something they believe in. As if to emphasize his point, a squadron of mixed human and alien ships passed by the viewport, their crews working together with an efficiency that would have been impossible under the rigid hierarchies of the old empire. Federation vessels were crewed by volunteers from dozens of species, united by shared principles rather than fear of punishment. What's next? Sarah asked. The Council has approved the Deep Exploration Initiative, Thalek replied. Mixed species crews, peaceful contact protocols, and a mandate to offer Federation membership to any civilization that meets our standards for individual rights and voluntary governance. Sarah nodded approvingly. The Deep Exploration Initiative represented everything the Federation stood for. Instead of expanding through conquest, they would grow through invitation. Instead of imposing their will on other species, they would offer cooperation and mutual benefit. It was, she reflected, exactly the opposite of everything the Stellar Dominion had represented. Admiral Chan to the bridge. Came an announcement over the ship's communication system. Priority message from Federation Command. Sarah and Thalek made their way to the bridge, where Commander Park was waiting with a datapad and an expression of barely contained excitement. What is it? Sarah asked. Ma'am, we've just received confirmation from the Andromeda Deep Space Array. They've detected what appears to be an artificial signal from another galaxy entirely. The xenolinguistics team thinks it might be a greeting. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Another galaxy meant civilizations that had never heard of the Stellar Dominion, species that had developed entirely independently of the known galactic community. Characteristics of the signal, she asked. Non-threatening, highly complex, definitely artificial. The preliminary analysis suggests it's some kind of mathematical progression designed to demonstrate intelligence and peaceful intent. Sarah looked at Thalek, who was studying the data with obvious fascination. What do you think, Ambassador? I think, he said slowly, that the Federation is about to face its greatest test yet. If there are civilizations in other galaxies, and if they're trying to make contact, then we'll do what we always do, Sarah finished. We'll meet them as equals and offer them friendship instead of conquest. As the UES Defiance began preparations for humanity's most ambitious voyage yet, Sarah reflected on how far they had all come. 6 months ago, the galaxy had been ruled by an empire that saw other species as resources to be exploited. Now it was governed by a federation that saw them as partners to be cherished. It had been the greatest revolution in galactic history, started by one species that refused to kneel and completed by countless others who chose to stand. The age of empire was over. The age of freedom had begun, and it was expanding beyond the stars themselves. In the depths of space, the signal from another galaxy continued to pulse with mathematical precision, carrying with it the promise of new friends, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that cooperation was stronger than conquest. Humanity had taught the galaxy that freedom was possible. Now, they would carry that lesson to the stars themselves, one peaceful contact at a time. The future had never looked brighter.